and welcome to Property Question Time. I'm Lucia France and this is the show where you can have any of your questions about property answered. Now joining us in the studio we have a panel of experts. So Garrett O'Hanlon, welcome to the show. He is the founding director of MAP Chartered Surveyors. We also have Tony Gimple as well, founding director of Less Tax for Landlords. And joining us again in the studio today, we have Stephen Galphin, a London-based property consultant. So welcome to the show, everybody. Good to see you all today. Garrett, we're going to start with you. So this is a question in about surveyors. Somebody's written in to say, why do all surveyors' reports tell me that I need to get someone else to test the gas, electric, central heating and the like? Is that normal?
Yes, that is normal. I'm a great believer in sometimes in medical analogies for property because I think people can relate to it quite well. And if you consider the house, the property as a whole as a body, then your surveyor is kind of your GP or your general surgeon who will give you opinions about the whole of that property. However, if you want to go into more detail about the arteries and the veins or the tendons or something like that, you will go to a haematologist or somebody else, and the services are much like that. So you need electricians to determine exactly the condition of the electrics. Even they can't do that with just a visual inspection, which is what we do as surveyors. They would need to physically test those to confirm their condition. The same applies with the gas, with the heating, and with the drainage too. You'll get pointers generally, depending on the type of survey that you've had, as to whether that's particularly pertinent in your case, but it is entirely inappropriate that a surveyor should give you the chapter and verse on those elements.
Right, okay. And are there any of those elements that, or other ones that you can think of that people can test themselves, or, you know, that they don't really need to get the experts in for?
Well, there's always arguments that on newer properties it's less relevant, or if you have current certificates of compliance, which particularly, let's say if you're buying a property which has been recently rented, it's likely those certificates of compliance will be in place. So if they can be produced, then that's adequate to satisfy the position. Yeah. But generally speaking, proceed with caution on services.
Okay, and is there anything that you would say, you know, above all, definitely get that checked, whether it's been checked before or not?
Of those, if anything, probably the drains, because they're the thing that you just really can't have much of an idea about at all. We would sometimes push people in that direction if there's some movement, some settlement perhaps on a driveway, or some cracking around near to the drains and stuff like that. So yes, possibly that, slightly more than the others, I would say. Right,
okay, lovely. Thank you very much, Garrett. So moving on to you now, Tony. This is quite a long question, so bear with me. So I purchased a property a long time ago before I met my husband. I still have this property in my name only, and I am a 40% taxpayer. My partner pays 20% tax. Now, to buy our first home together, I remortgaged my property and I have a buy-to-let mortgage on it. It's an interest-only mortgage at £380 a month. Adding rates is another £40 a month. Our rental income is £475 a month, and monthly profit, therefore, is £55 a month or £660 per year. However, with the new tax regulations, I'm going to be paying out a lot more tax. I'm wondering what options I have. I have read up on tenants in common.
Okay. Tenants in common is generally a good thing. You'll each own a defined share, which means you can protect that share for children, grandchildren and so on. From purely Section 24, the removal of mortgage interest relief against income tax, you could give a proportion of the property to your husband, but you've got to be careful that it doesn't fall foul of stamp duty because there's value in the mortgage. Once it's done, you can allocate income to the other party, in this case the husband, but you'll only be able to claim the proportion which is directly related to the buy-to-let, not to the original purchase as your home.
And how would that work with stamp duty then for the husband coming in on the property?
Well, there could be a stamp duty charge if the value of the mortgage is above the threshold, because that's where the value is.
Right, okay. But basically what you're saying is they have to base it all on the new mortgage rather than...
Effectively.
Okay, right. And is there any other things that you can recommend that this lady does before, you know, deciding to do that or not?
Yeah, take professional advice. If they are going to become tenants in common, they'll need new wills dealing with their share of the property. And it's very important with tenants in common, because they're now two legal personalities, that they have a lasting power of attorney for their property and financial affairs. So if they're not quite dead but not quite alive either, they need to appoint somebody, each other and a spare, who can speak and act on their behalf, because both signatures are required.
Right, okay, so the point is there to sort of plan ahead a little bit.
Plan ahead, take professional advice, don't be afraid to pay for it.
Right, okay, lovely. Thank you very much, Tony. Stephen, how are you?
I'm fine, thank you.
Good, good. Now we've got a question about London property here. I'm very conscious of wanting to make my next property move into an area where the value is going to increase. I'm also concerned whether to buy a house in the London suburbs or perhaps a modern apartment in central or east London. Are there any guidelines, or is there any advice for me that could be offered to help me to make a wise decision?
Right, well that's quite a deep question, because I think what we'd need to know is a little bit more about the family situation.
Yes.
I don't think ever we should just buy a home on the basis of investment and hopefully upward rising prices. You've got to make a decision in the first instance what property is going to be suitable for you. Now, it's quite an obvious fact that if you want a house in the suburbs, you're going to get better value for money in terms of pound per square feet that you're buying. Central London, particularly East London, Stratford, Isle of Dogs, Canary Wharf, that sort of area, there's a huge amount of apartments come into the market, and I suspect that over the next couple of years we'll see prices fairly stable in those sort of areas, looking to an upward rise after we've settled Brexit and everybody's perhaps in a better mood. But I do think that the most important factor here is to get the property that suits you. Are you going to have a family? Do you have a family? What about the consideration of schools? How is commuting going to be for you? Commuting today is not a cheap exercise. It's both time-consuming and financially consuming. So it's very, very important. I would put that above looking at capital gain, although I do accept that I think in central London or East London, perhaps where the majority of activity is now, your gain is probably going to be a lot higher than in the suburbs.
Right, okay. And is there any other areas that you can think of in terms of suburbs that are maybe up and coming, or places where there's a lot more development going on now? Well,
it's very difficult to know, because I mean I can remember coming to London 30 years ago and everybody telling me that City Road was the new buzz place. Well, I'm still hearing that now.
Still don't want to live there.
Still don't want to live there. You know, it's quite important, especially again if you've got a family, you've got to look at the infrastructure that surrounds these apartments. I think that's very, very important. I can remember many years ago when I first came to London, I lived down at St Catherine's Dock. It was lovely, but there were no shops. There was nothing to do.
That's true, actually. Yeah.
So very important. You've got to get your environment right, just as important as the upward gain in price.
And also here with this question, I mean, would you maybe recommend renting in the area that you were going to buy? I mean, obviously, again, in London, that's not a cheap exercise, but would that be an idea?
Well, in theory, it could be quite a nice idea. I know a lot of people who buy on the continent like to rent first and try the area out. I'm not sure it works quite so well here, because, you know, to move into an apartment, and it's quite an expensive exercise, even if it's furnished, you know, you've got fees to pay, you register yourself for council tax, there's all that sort of thing that needs to be changed and moved around once you decide to buy. So I think buying at the first opportunity is a good idea. Getting on the housing ladder is a great idea, but just be careful. I've often said on this programme, you know, getting into property is very easy. Getting out sometimes is not always that easy.
Yes, agreed.
And there's another point to that. If you're buying your own home, it's your own home. It's not an investment.
It is.
You have to actually live there.
You have to live there. So the whole thing about capital growth, if you're buying it for an investment, well, buy it for an investment. It's a totally different decision.
Yeah.
Find somewhere you want to live and raise your kids.
Yeah,
if it makes money, whoopee-doo. If not, hey-ho, you've got a roof over your head.
That's right. And is there any advice in terms of, a lot of people kind of talk about getting somewhere getting in early on off-plan developments. So is that a way of sort of making it a bit more affordable as well?
Well, again, that's quite a deep subject, but very simply, just remember, if you're going in off-plan, you're perhaps buying 2 years ahead of construction. Are you sure about your situation in 2 years' time? Is it going to be the same? Are you going to be able to fund that purchase, looking at securing finance 2 years ahead? Very, very difficult. And you'll have seen on the programme here, we have many questions. People often say, well, how can I get out of a commitment I've made because it was made on the spur of the moment, hoping for a capital gain, hoping to move the property on, perhaps never move in, but just sell the bit of paper. Yeah. Doesn't always work like that, I'm afraid.
Great. Okay, thank you, Stephen. Any other thoughts there on that?
Yeah, I've seen over the years a number of developments that were going to be the next wonderful thing, as you say, and they have been developed, but the developments which are there have subsequently gone down and down and down. And it doesn't mean, because, as we were saying earlier there isn't the infrastructure that's come around it. And actually those estates do seem to suffer. So, you've got to be very, very careful where you choose.
And you mean down as in terms of value they've gone down?
In terms of value, in terms of presentation, occupation, the whole thing really. They just don't catch fire as people were hoping they would.
Okay, great.
Well, as the case may be.
Yes.
Well, thank you very much, guys. We will be back very shortly after this break. Welcome back to Property Question Time. I'm Lucia and I'm here with Garrett, Tony and Stephen. We've got lots more questions to get on with, so let's start again with you, Garrett. This one's about Japanese knotweed. Is Japanese knotweed a genuine problem? I've heard it has been hugely overstated and that this is now being corrected. Is this true?
Yes, it is true. I wrote an article in the professional journals 3 years ago to say that the whole Japanese knotweed situation was ridiculously overstated, that it had never caused damage to any sound buildings, nor could it. And I've represented that opinion several times since. In the last week or two, there's some information that's come out from some studies which have been done at Leeds University to say exactly what I said 3 years ago. So it's definitely not a problem. Trees are a much bigger problem to buildings than is Japanese knotweed. However, this whole subculture has grown up of it being demonised, and people have been unable to buy properties because of Japanese knotweed being there. People have been unable to remortgage because of this. There have been situations where claims have been made against surveyors in particular because of Japanese knotweed within the grounds, and it's absolute arrant nonsense. It's just a vigorous growing plant, and if you look at the Royal Horticultural Society website, it will tell you that, which will damage other plants but cannot possibly damage concrete or brickwork. So it's been a huge change, and the hope now is that lenders will change the policies which they have put together on this, which is based on no fact at all. But there are lots and lots of people who've lost lots and lots of money because of this issue, and whether there will be redress for those people, I don't know. I doubt it, the way things work, but it is not a problem. But presently, until they change their policies, it will still be perceived as a problem.
So if you have got that on that particular plant on a property of yours, would you recommend getting rid of it then, in that case?
Certainly you want to get rid of it because it's a problem for the rest of the plants in the garden, but it's quite easy to get rid of. The furore which surrounded it has been such that companies have put together very expensive schemes for eradication. The reality is that you can buy a certain weed killer at your local DIY shop, and if you spray the plant for 2 or 3 years, it will kill it.
Right, okay.
So the idea you need to spend tens of thousands of pounds to eradicate a plant which doesn't actually do any damage to properties at all is ludicrous, and I'm pleased that after 3 years of me saying this, the rest of the profession seems to be catching up. Finally
they listened, but what was the problem in the first place? Why did it become such a big deal?
I have no idea, if I'm honest with you. There was a situation where it was discovered on the Olympic site, and it kind of grew from that. But it's been here for 150 years. I still have yet to have anybody present to me one single case of it damaging anything at all. If you have a property which has damage, which has cracks, then the plant will find its way in, as would ivy, as would Russian vine, as would lots of other plants. But that's not damaging the building. It can't do that, and it could never do that. So it's very, very disappointing that elements of the property profession jumped on that bandwagon with no substance whatsoever and the fact that it's probably cost millions of pounds to lots of people.
And is there any, I mean, obviously, so the property basically would have had to be damaged in some way or structurally unsound in some way for it to cause any problems?
For it to penetrate through the damage which already existed, yes. It cannot damage concrete and brickwork. It's nonsense.
Great. Well, thank you, Garrett. Good for clearing that up, even though it's 3 years down the line. Moving on to Tony, we've got another quite lengthy question here for you. I started letting my property in June 2016. Therefore, I'm in the process of completing my self-assessment tax return. In about February 2016, so before the start of the 16-17 tax year, I got my property ready for renting whilst I still lived there. Are these costs of getting it ready tax deductible allowances? Also, how exact are HMRC with figures? That's a good one.
Yeah, okay. The costs can be treated as a loss expense on the first day of rental.
Right, so not whilst living in the property?
Not whilst living in the property.
Okay.
And you will need to produce a valid receipt. It is a complex question, and it's not an easy one to give a simple answer to. Once again, the devil is in the detail. The real point here is, don't try and complete the tax return yourself. Taxes on rental properties are complex. Seek professional advice, and if it goes wrong, the professional advisor will have professional indemnity insurance. If you get it wrong and HMRC turn up on your doorstep, who are you going to turn to?
So I don't know.
Exactly, yourself. Yeah. Having said that,
then have to get professional advice as well. So
yeah,
you might as well get it at the start.
Yeah, but you can speak to HMRC directly. They are really good. They can't give you tax advice, but they can. But they can, broadly point you in the right direction.
Okay.
I think I would also generally work on the basis that HMRC can add up.
Well, this is my next question. How exact are HMRC with figures? I'm sure this is a question lots of people want the answer to.
It really depends. If they are looking into you, they've opened an inquiry and investigation, it'll be a drains up review, and
right.
they will check the math. There's always rounding up, rounding down errors, but be as exact as you can. Yeah. Doesn't hurt.
And in terms of what this question was asking, I got my property ready for renting whilst I still live there. So I guess that would mean, buying new furniture for it or things like that. Is there anything that can be sort of carried forward after somebody would move in as a rental?
You're into really quite complex areas where we get into what can we put down for wear and tear, replacement. But in broad terms, all the time that it's your principal private residence, you're living there, those costs are improving your own home.
Right, okay.
Can I just say one more thing to what Tony was saying, that if you do have a professional advisor, which is very, very good advice, that quite often they will offer you an insurance product. So if you are investigated, you can cover the cost of those investigations rather than needing to fund those yourself as well.
Okay,
and that will only come through your professional advisor, I think I'm right in saying.
Or if you're a member of one of the trade bodies, some of them offer it, but always read the small print.
Very wise advice there. Thank you very much, Tony. And Stephen, we've got another one about London here. So, I'm making a buying decision. Is there any significant benefit to holding out for a freehold property that suits my family over a leasehold one? There seem to be more leasehold properties available in London than freehold properties, from what I can tell.
Okay, well, I think the first thing to do here is just look at the difference between the two. Now, as it stands at the moment, in some people's eyes, and usually people who are coming into London from outside of London who are not used to leasehold properties, it can be viewed as a sort of poor relation to freehold. But let's just go back at the logic of leasehold. The logic of leasehold is this: you've got a lot of multi-unit blocks, they need to be managed, and you need to have, as landlord or managing agent, you need to have control over that building. You need to be able to implement regulations and conditions that make living for all acceptable. And the only way you can do that, of course, is if the freeholder retains his interest and then dictates down through the lease. And again, I've often said on this programme, one of the problems that you get with leasehold is when people try and circumvent the lease, either the tenant, the occupant, or the landlord. And I frequently say, you know, you both signed a lease, so why don't you just do what it says?
Yeah.
Simple as that.
Yeah.
You'll have been shown that lease when you bought. Just stick to the words, because going outside of the lease always causes a problem. So leasehold is not a secondary sort of purchase over and above under freehold. Freehold is, of course, a little bit more advantageous in so much as that you may be given a share of that freehold at some point in time,
right,
and then able to control the service charge to some degree. But most landlords these days are pretty good. They are covered by a lot of legislation, so the sort of things that we saw happen in the 60s, 70s and perhaps into the early 80s with leasehold properties don't exist anymore. The problems aren't there anymore. So I don't think there's any great advantage in holding out on buying simply because something is leasehold or freehold. In addition to that, the details are really not yet known, but we are going to have new legislation in terms of leasehold properties, which will, I understand, make it easier for people to take a share of the freehold, to get some control of their own property. And so therefore, if there are any sort of lingering doubts about leasehold, I think they'll soon be gone.
Right. And if people are, or this person is buying a leasehold property, would you recommend anything in terms of the length of the lease as well?
Well, that comes down to financing more than anything else. You will have extreme difficulty financing any leasehold interest under about 50 years. But again, now the process of extending that lease is a lot easier today than it was many years ago. A lot of the London estates were very difficult about lease extensions and extending the period of time, but now it's quite a usual process, and there are set formulas for calculating the worth of that.
Okay, well, that's good to know. And is there, I mean, they say here there seem to be more leasehold properties available in London than freehold. I guess that is true as well. Is that just purely because of the amount of people in the one area?
That's simply because of the volume of apartments within blocks. And again, today, you know, it's not unusual to have 70, 75 stories and perhaps, you know, 1,000 apartments in one block.
Well, thank you very much to all of our panel of experts here today. Thank you for watching. If you've got any questions you would like to get in touch with us to have answered, it's info@propertytelevision.co.uk, or just go to the website property-tv.co.uk. We'll see you next time.